We are so happy after 2 years of destruction, hunger, killing, and genocide. Thank God that this is over.
A major breakthrough in the war in Gaza. Reaction to news that Israel and Hamas have agreed to the first phase of a peace plan to pause fighting and release hostages. Pope Leo keeps making news. He releases his first papal exhortation focused on love for the poor, and his comments when he is presented with letters from immigrants in the U.S. fearing deportation.
Colorado's law hurts kids struggling with gender dysphoria most of all.
And should medical professionals be permitted to bring their religious perspective into therapy for children who struggle with their gender identity? The U.S. Supreme Court takes up the case. EWTN News in Depth starts now.
Israelis and Palestinians alike take to the streets celebrating a monumental but delicate agreement that could spell freedom for Israel's hostages and peace for the people of Gaza. Welcome to EWTN News in Depth. I'm Catherine Hadro. That agreement, the first phase in a sweeping peace deal, is a major breakthrough in a brutal conflict that has wrought death and devastation now for 2 years. Two years ago this week, the morning of October 7th, Iran-backed Hamas militants stormed an outdoor music festival in neighboring kibbutz in southern Israel, turning a Jewish holiday into the deadliest terrorist attack in the country's history. 1,200 people died and 251 were taken hostage. Many of those hostages have been released in exchange for Palestinian prisoners throughout the past 2 years. 48 remain captive in Gaza, 20 of whom are believed to still be alive. Those hostages are now expected to be released in the coming days in a prisoner exchange. But the Israeli counteroffensive in the Gaza Strip against Hamas has had disastrous consequences for the more than 2 million Palestinians who live there. The enclave's health ministry says more than 67,000 civilians have died and many more wounded. Most Palestinians have been displaced after their cities and neighborhoods have been turned to rubble. The war has put Gaza on the brink of famine as Israel cuts off a majority of humanitarian aid from entering the enclave. Israel has faced mounting condemnation from the international community for its military operations. With one heartbreaking tragedy after another, we arrived this week at what appears to be a historic peace agreement brokered by President Donald Trump.
Last night, we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace.
The agreement marks a major diplomatic victory for the president. On Thursday night, the Israeli cabinet approved it. That approval started the clock on the first phase of the plan in which the Israeli military must withdraw from parts of Gaza and Hamas must, within 3 days, return the hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. In the meantime, in Egypt, high-level meetings between Arab partners helping to solidify the peace deal and officials representing Hamas militants continued through this week. Difficult portions of the plan include a demand that Hamas disarm and the question of who will govern Gaza. But joy has spread throughout both Gaza and Israel as the prospect of peace is at hand. For the Israeli populace, the hostage release, likely on Monday, is key.
Every moment I imagine that moment of the day after, when the hostages will be home, when the soldiers return home, I get chills all over from head to toe, and I can't even imagine the amount of joy we will be able to feel as a people, finally.
As anticipation mounts for the return of the living hostages and the remains of those who have died, President Trump announced he will head to the Middle East this weekend for official signing ceremonies. In the meantime, the U.S. military is preparing to send as many as 200 U.S. troops to Israel to provide support for a new international stabilization force to oversee security and to help train a Palestinian police unit to ensure stability in the region. Will this historic ceasefire and peace agreement hold? Middle East expert and EWTN contributor Alberto Fernandez told me the situation is delicate and complicated.
There's been tremendous pressure in getting the beginning right and the first steps of a ceasefire, a peace agreement, whatever you want to call it, a truce, right. And great thanks is owed to the Trump administration, to the president for having accomplished this. The challenge, the biggest challenge, is at medium to long term. Is Hamas going to surrender its weapons? Is it going to cede power in Gaza? Or will it, as it has said that it will do, try to keep as many weapons as possible and try to somehow maintain itself in power? On the Israeli side, if the Israelis see that, if they see Hamas beginning to maneuver and wiggle out of an agreement, how will the Israelis react in, for example, stopping withdrawal from parts of the Gaza territory that they still hold?
Joining us now to help make sense of this historic moment and what comes next in this breakthrough of a peace deal are two thoughtful voices who have been closely tracking the war in Gaza. Robert Destro is a recently retired professor of law at the Catholic University of America's Columbus School of Law. He served in the previous Trump administration's State Department as Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and his legal work includes peace efforts in the Middle East, as well as efforts promoting the release of political prisoners and prisoners of conscience in the Middle East. Bethany Mandel is a Jewish journalist, author, and commentator who's written extensively about faith, culture, and Israel, and is based here in the Washington, D.C. area. She has worked closely with the hostage families since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attack. Thank you both for joining me for this discussion. Bethany, I want to go to you first. Your reaction to the news this week and the release of the hostages.
I'm so relieved, and I'm so thankful that President Trump made this a top priority. It's been such a difficult road, and honestly one that a lot of Americans and a lot of Jews and a lot of Israelis didn't think that we would ever see. I don't know if 3 weeks ago you had told me that all the hostages would be released and in one go. It's honestly a miracle. And one incredible thing to note is that it's scheduled to happen on Monday, which is on the Hebrew calendar 2 years to the day. It's on Simchat Torah, which is the holiday that was October 7th. And so it feels like a miracle from God, honestly, that we're getting these incredible souls back, both to be rehabilitated who are still alive, and the 28 individuals who will be able to, their families will be able to have closure.
Even more significant with that context, Bethany. Robert, how significant of a success is it that Israel and Hamas have agreed to phase one of this peace plan? What's your reaction to this week's news?
It's enormously successful, and it fits kind of dynamically into the president's oft-repeated line, let's just stop the killing. So let's just cut this stuff. And what he's done is he's managed to pull together the entire Arab world. And because it's not going to happen. Phase two isn't going to happen unless you have the support of all the Arab leaders.
Bethany, this first phase of the peace deal does mean that Hamas will release 48 hostages, 20 of whom are believed to still be alive, in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. How does that part of the peace deal sit with you?
So, I mean, this is unfortunately the dynamic that we've seen, and something that one of the Israelis, I think it was Ben-Gvir, one of the ministers in the Israeli government, he said to the American team, he said, if this had happened at a music festival in America, and you had seen hundreds of people kidnapped from a music festival in America, you wouldn't be opening your prison doors to release people in exchange. And so he wanted to make clear to the Americans the unevenness of this exchange. There are murderers who put bombs onto buses, another murderer murdered a mother of 6 in cold blood. He stabbed her. These are not petty criminals. These are people serving life sentences for terror attacks, and now they're going to be released back into freedom. And unfortunately, we know, and we've seen it in the past with other releases, that they're going to return and they're going to commit murder again and again and again. And it contributes to this cycle of violence. But unfortunately, Israel has been put in a position where, in order to get the freedom of these hostages who were taken from a music festival, or taken from their homes. There's only 2 IDF soldiers in this batch. The rest are civilians. They were kidnapped from a music festival 2 years ago and starved almost to death underground. The videos that Hamas themselves have released of the starvation that they inflicted on these, it feels like the Holocaust all over again. And so while we're feeling joyful, also we need to brace ourselves for the images that are going to come out, because they've been starved to death for 2 years, and we've heard so much testimony from other releases and we've seen how they've looked. I think that it's going to be joyful, but it's also going to be disturbing.
Well, speaking of what comes next, Robert, our EWTN News contributor Alberto Fernandez, a former diplomat, Middle East policy expert, says what happens next with the peace deal is critical. Let's take a listen.
The key is that the very first steps are probably going to go well. So there's going to be optimism over the next week. The big challenge is going to be after those initial stages are complete and we face the challenge of disarmament and leaving power, Hamas disarming and leaving power, Israel withdrawing and Israel reacting if indeed that disarmament and that leaving of power doesn't take place.
Robert, that being said, what does a good outcome ultimately look like? What are you going to be looking for next?
Well, the first thing we're going to be looking for is the physical security of both the people in the Palestinian territories, Gaza and the West Bank, and also the physical security of the Israelis. I mean, physical security is the most basic human right there is. And so without that, we're not going anywhere else. And what's great about President Trump doing this with all the Arab leaders, basically in coalition, is that we can then look directly at the question, how do we settle this place down? Because you can't rebuild it until you settle it down.
Bethany, I know that you have worked closely with many of these hostage families. You've come to know them personally. Can you share some personal insight as to what these past 2 years have been like for them?
It's been horrifying. Rachel Goldberg-Polin, the mother of a murdered hostage, her son was murdered over a year after he was taken. She compares it to a truck running over you, but then just sitting on your chest. And that's what this experience has been like for all of these families, because for a lot of them, they went through the trauma of October 7th very personally. Omri Miran, one of the fathers that was taken, who's still being held, who will be released, his wife and 2 young children, a 2-year-old and an infant, watched him be taken. Their kibbutz was taken over, and they watched him ripped out of their home, and their home was destroyed. And so you have that trauma, and all of the families of everyone else who was at the festival who were taken from their military bases. There's 2 soldiers who were taken from their bases. They had the trauma of not knowing for weeks if their loved one was alive, and then trying to advocate for them, never knowing if they're going to get a knock on the door that they were killed in captivity or that they were never alive in captivity. And so this has been an incredible ongoing trauma that they've gone through for 2 years. I went on the Hill once with the brother of a hostage who ended up being murdered in the end, and she was murdered along with Hirsch. So this was a year into it. And I remember so vividly, we were on the Hill going into meetings, and he would step out and have to smoke a joint. He would have to smoke pot because he was self-medicating the anxiety with marijuana. And I remember being outside the Capitol building as he's smoking a joint and thinking, what if we get caught? But I mean, we haven't, this is, what do you say? Like, he's self-medicating with marijuana, but this is the level of trauma that they've had to live through for 2 full years.
Numbing themselves,
Yes,
having
yes.
to. Robert, what is the role of Pope Leo and the Vatican in maintaining peace in the Middle East?
Well, the general role of the Pope is to provide moral guidance. I mean, that's, and at bottom, this entire conflict in the whole Middle East is a moral problem. It's basically how do you treat one another in accordance with your own human dignity. So to the extent that he can stay on that message, I understand he's going to Turkey, he's going to Lebanon, which is actually a part, I mean, if you look at this historically, that was part of the Ottoman Empire. So this is kind of, at least I hope, the final battle of World War I. I mean, because that's, it started in World War I. The Ottoman Empire collapsed after World War I. That's when the British and French took over the Middle East, and now it's time for the great powers to get out of the way and let the people who live there live their own lives.
Bethany, Robert, I am so grateful to have both of your great insights during what is a momentous week right now. Robert, Bethany, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Early Friday morning, the Nobel Prize Committee announced the winner of the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize. It goes to Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, for promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela. The committee says Machado is helping to achieve just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy. Machado has become a symbol of democratic resistance against authoritarianism and the government of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. She has been forced into hiding for her own protection. Upon learning she was being awarded the prize, Machado dedicated it to the suffering people of Venezuela and to President Trump for his support in opposition to the Maduro regime. Still to come on this edition of EWTN News in Depth, Pope Leo signs the first magisterial document of his papacy, a papal exhortation focused on love for the poor. Analysis from our Vatican Bureau next.
I view my work as an outpouring of my faith. I want what is best for my clients.
The U.S. Supreme Court hears arguments in the case of this Christian therapist who says she has a free speech right to bring her religious perspective into conversations she has with children who struggle with gender identity or same-sex attraction.
A group called Hope of the Poor is helping the homeless and volunteers who serve them encounter Christ through kindness and coffee. I'm Alan Holdren in Omaha, Nebraska. That story ahead.
And the Conclave Kids from Chicago get their own brief audience with Pope Leo. EWTN News in Depth is coming right back.
In some of his strongest language yet on the issue of immigration, Pope Leo urged U.S. bishops to stand with migrants and refugees. He shared those comments during a private meeting with Bishop Mark Seitz from El Paso, Texas. During a brief private audience on Wednesday, Bishop Seitz gave the Holy Father handwritten letters from immigrants in the U.S., tied and twined with a note that read in Spanish, "Pope Leo, please listen to the cry of those who are being marginalized." Seitz and Auxiliary Bishop Anthony Salino also showed Pope Leo, whom they said became visibly emotional, a video of immigrants sharing how mass deportations have broken up their families. An outspoken advocate for immigrants, Seitz says Pope Leo vowed to stand with him and his work.
One exchange we had, and I think I expressed probably what was on his mind already, is that we don't want to get into the political fray. We're not politicians. But we need to teach the faith. We need to express what the Gospels teach us.
According to members of the U.S. delegation, Pope Leo encouraged Seitz and his brother bishops to continue speaking strongly on the issue of immigration. His comments come as President Trump continues his crackdown on illegal immigration across the U.S. The Holy Father's heart for the marginalized is clear in the first major writing of his pontificate, an apostolic exhortation dedicated to the gospel's call to love the poor. The Vatican released Dilexi Te, Latin for I have loved you, on Thursday. Through 5 chapters, Pope Leo writes how we are not just called to serve our impoverished brothers and sisters, but to see them as evangelists who can teach us to rely on God. He highlights the importance of almsgiving, but also emphasizes the poor's vital need for spiritual care. EWTN News senior Vatican analyst Frank Rocca explains that an exhortation like Leo's is all about pastoral practicals.
An apostolic exhortation is typically more practical. It's an exhortation, it's an encouragement, and it's sort of encouraging us to take this doctrine of the love for the poor and apply it and how to do that.
This exhortation is a work of 4 hands, meaning Pope Leo finished a writing that his predecessor, the late Pope Francis, began in the final months of his life. The Vatican does not specify which pope wrote which sections. During a press conference, Cardinal Michael Czerny emphasized that the document is 100% Francis and 100% Leo. To break down now the first major document of Pope Leo XIV's pontificate, we are joined from Rome by Hannah Brockhaus, EWTN Deputy Vatican Editor. Hannah, thanks for being with us. First, what stood out to you from Dilexi Te?
Thanks, Catherine. Something that stood out to me about this document is how incredibly simple it is in its direction to Christians. It's not a political document. It's absolutely something theological and spiritual and addressing you and me and what we can do to help people, whether that's on the local level or even if it means fighting for injustice, even at the institutional or governmental level. However, he's not addressing nations directly.
And Hannah, we know that this document was largely written under Pope Francis's pontificate, but what does Dilexi Te signal about Pope Leo's priorities, and do we know at all how much of this document he wrote?
We don't know who wrote which parts, and as was mentioned earlier in the program, Cardinal Czerny, who is the Vatican's cardinal on main cardinal on this issue of poverty, said we should really just read it completely as Pope Leo's. He signed it. He has taken it into his magisterium, his teaching of his pontificate. So we don't know exactly who wrote each parts, but I think that's a great signal about Leo's dedication to showing a continuity between him and his predecessor. He doesn't want this to be seen as some sort of rupture now with him and the last Pope, Pope Francis, but he wants to show that the same issues that were in the heart of Francis are also on his heart.
Hannah, I spoke with the national president of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul USA for his reaction to Dilexi Te. Here's what he had to say.
This document is so powerful in the sense that it not only just says, go serve the poor, go help the poor, give alms, but it talks about the fundamental need to not only help the poor, but to advocate for the poor and to make efforts to change systems and policies that are keeping people poor and preventing them from becoming successful.
Hannah, care for the poor is a core belief of Christianity that has been with us since the Gospels and the start of the church. Jesus was very clear. We must care for the poor for the sake of our own soul. So does this apostolic exhortation provide a new understanding on this or advance it with a new teaching? What is something we have not heard from the church before when it comes to caring for the impoverished?
I actually think that this document does a little bit of the opposite. Rather than being something brand new that none of us have heard before, it's more of a reminder of how deeply steeped the church is in this teaching of caring for the poor, loving the poor. The document spends a lot of time going back and reminding us that starting with Christ, who himself became poor, the church has always served the poor, but also welcomed them into our communities, that they were one of us. And it's also a great reminder, maybe this is less, not so much new, but just a good reminder of how much we receive as well. So it's not only the poor who receive from us and should be given good things and aid by us, but that we, the giver, can also receive grace, can also receive things in return, especially a spiritual and an evangelization from them.
Absolutely. Hannah, just before this interview, we reported on Pope Leo's message this week to those who are advocating for migrants in the U.S. How is that message in line with what he writes in this first apostolic exhortation?
Pope Leo takes a really broad view of who is marginalized, who is the poor, and how he defines that. And so in this document, he includes migrants and refugees, especially those who are forced to migrate from their home countries. And he says that they are deserving of our welcoming, of our help, that they are a kind of poor as well. And he talks about the structures and the issues in their home countries as well, the structures of injustice that we can try to help correct that force people to flee their homes.
Finally, Hannah, while I have you, I do want to address other major news from the Vatican. The Vatican announced this week Pope Leo will visit Turkey and Lebanon in late November in the first apostolic journey of his pontificate. What is the significance of this trip and these specific sites?
Well, first of all, it's another sign of continuity, right, with the pontificate of Pope Francis. So These were both trips to Lebanon and to Turkey that Pope Francis wanted to make but was unable to before his last illness and death. So Leo is taking those back up and saying, okay, I'm the Pope now, and I'm going to travel to those places. In Turkey, the concentration will be on Christian unity as he celebrates the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea this year. But then in Lebanon, it will be an excellent chance for him to promote peace and bring a message of peace in the Middle East to the people of the Middle East.
Very much needed. Hannah Brockhaus, grateful for you as always. Thank you. And in another special first for Pope Leo this week, he met his mini look-alike. During his general audience on Wednesday, the Holy Father greeted students from Our Lady of Mount Carmel Academy in Lakeview, Illinois. The grade schoolers went viral in May for staging a mock conclave complete with a college of cardinals and white smoke. In an unforgettable moment, Pope Leo shook hands with Pope Augie and briefly put on his Zucchetto. Augie says it was the coolest field trip he'll ever take. News headlines are next in the Week in Review. This Saturday and Sunday marks the second full weekend of a government shutdown. The dysfunction of our federal government tops headlines in the Week in Review. Late this week, on a 7th vote, the Senate failed to pass either spending proposal from Democrats and Republicans. Now, members of Congress are on vacation for the long holiday weekend, while federal workers, including members of the U.S. military, face their first missed paycheck. The blame game goes in both directions, each side saying the other is responsible for a government that right now has no approved funding source. Republicans say Democrats won't provide the votes necessary to pass a clean resolution budget to keep the government operating. Democrats say the impasse will only be solved when Republicans agree to address looming health insurance premium increases and extend billions of dollars in Affordable Care Act subsidies. In prior shutdowns, Congress engaged in tough face-to-face negotiations, but this time House Speaker Mike Johnson has not even called the House into session. One of the most high-profile Republicans on Capitol Hill is breaking ranks, saying she thinks that is a mistake.
I'm not putting the blame on the president. I'm actually putting the blame on the Speaker and Leader Thune in the Senate. This should not be happening. And I don't think, look, as a member of Congress, we already have a low enough job approval rating. This shutdown is just going to drive everybody's approval rating that much lower.
Green says she is hearing from constituents, senior citizens, friends, neighbors, even her own adult children, that they want the government to focus on and solve problems instead of focusing on political party infighting. Though Congress members receive their government salaries during a government shutdown, others do not. Many federal workers missed their first full paycheck on Friday. Members of the military, including those stationed overseas, miss their first paycheck next Wednesday. Meanwhile, federal workers are stuck paying the price as the shutdown drags on. President Trump and the White House even signaled this week that some furloughed employees might not receive back pay. He did not specify who would be impacted, but said, quote, "It really depends on who you're talking about. But for the most part, we're going to take care of our people." The move would be a stark break from long-standing precedent that government employees, those both furloughed and deemed essential, receive payment after the shutdown ends, a guarantee under a law Trump himself signed in 2019. Thousands of flights delayed this week as major airports grapple with a staffing shortage. Air traffic controllers are considered essential and required to work during a government shutdown. But with no payday in sight, many are calling in sick. Traffic facilities across the U.S., including in Newark, New Jersey, Chicago, and Washington, are struggling without their usual crew. A control tower in Burbank, California, even shut down completely Monday night. In response, the Department of Transportation has reduced traffic flow in and out of airports, leading to delays and cancellations. The legal battle continues over the White House plan to deploy National Guard troops to several Democrat-run cities to crack down on what the administration says are lawless and crime-ridden cities and to protect ICE agents who are trying to enforce Trump immigration policy. While the deployments are being met with legal challenges, a highly unusual deployment did occur this week when the Trump administration federalized Texas National Guard troops and sent them out of state to the Chicago area against the wishes of its mayor and the governor of Illinois.
Earlier today, the state of Illinois filed a lawsuit challenging Donald Trump's unlawful and unwarranted plans to deploy armed military troops to Chicago. There is no invasion here. There is no insurrection here. And local and state law enforcement are on the job and managing what they need to.
If you look at Chicago, Chicago's a great city where there's a lot of crime. And if the governor can't do the job, we'll do the job. It's all very simple. The governor gets up and he says, well, we can handle it. They can't handle it. They don't know what they're doing.
Though the Texas troops are already there, late Thursday, a federal judge blocked their deployment to Illinois for 2 weeks, finding no evidence that a rebellion is brewing in the state. There have been clashes between ICE agents and demonstrators in Chicago, Portland, and other cities, but critics say that does not justify the use of military troops. Other lawsuits challenging the legality of troop deployments are working their way through several courts. A Presbyterian minister is among the plaintiffs suing the federal government after ICE agents shot him in the head with a pepper ball while he was praying during a demonstration outside a Chicago ICE detention facility. After he fell to the ground, others came to the pastor's aid. Moments later, a federal agent sprayed Reverend David Black of the First Presbyterian Church of Chicago directly in the face with pepper spray. The woman who captured video of the incident on her cell phone said Black was clearly dressed and his clerical collar was praying and was doing nothing threatening.
I'm an everyday person. I'm a teacher. I'm a mother. I'm a friend. I help people. I consider myself a good person. I'm a real person out here dealing with this. I'm not an agitator. I'm not somebody being paid to come out here and do this. I'm a real person who cares about humanity. And so when I'm out here seeing this happen and seeing the callousness behind how they did it, I just couldn't stand by and just allow it to keep happening. It's just not okay.
The pastor has now joined a lawsuit with Chicago journalists and protesters suing the government for what is described as illegal and brutal suppression of their First Amendment rights and religious freedoms. Lawyers for the Trump administration say the plaintiffs are trying to dictate crowd control policy. This incident comes amid increasingly aggressive tactics by ICE officers towards demonstrators and in their arrests of immigrants and others believed to be in the country illegally. Systems are go for quick legal action in the case of former FBI Director James Comey, who was arraigned on Wednesday in federal court on charges he lied to Congress in 2020 and obstructed a congressional proceeding. Comey pleaded not guilty. The judge scheduled the trial to begin on January 5th, but that is after even earlier deadlines, including a November motions hearing to dismiss the case outright. Comey's attorney indicated he would be filing a series of motions, including vindictive prosecution, selective prosecution, and a retaliation brought at the direction of Donald Trump. President Trump has long blamed Comey for the FBI's investigation into Russian efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election. And for years, he has publicly demanded prosecutors indict Comey, despite standard norms about the Justice Department's independence from the White House. Until the Trump Justice Department installed a new acting U.S. attorney who got the Comey indictment 2 weeks ago, federal prosecutors investigating the case had long declined to file criminal charges for lack of evidence. Many legal experts and retired judges say the current efforts to seek retribution against Comey are an attack on the rule of law. On Thursday, that same acting U.S. attorney obtained an indictment against another Trump political opponent. New York Attorney General Letitia James was charged with bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution regarding a home mortgage. She denies wrongdoing and calls the charges baseless. James led a highly publicized investigation of the president, his adult sons, and his real estate business, and in 2024 won a civil fraud case against them, resulting in a nearly $500 million judgment. Though a New York appeals court later tossed the monetary penalty as excessive, the fraud verdict remains. Observers say the Comey and James indictments may just be the beginning of the president's efforts to target his perceived political foes in court. California officials have charged a 29-year-old man with sparking the devastating Pacific Palisades fire, the most destructive blazes in Los Angeles' history. Authorities arrested Jonathan Rinderknecht in Central Florida on Tuesday. Prosecutors accused the Uber driver of maliciously starting what is known as the Lockman Fire in a state park on January 1st. They say he was agitated the night he started the fire and previously generated photos of a burning city on ChatGPT. Rinderknecht Rinderknecht called 911 to report the blaze. Firefighters believed they had extinguished the fire, but it continued to smolder until it turned into the much larger Palisades fire a week later.
So essentially that fire was burning undetected underground until enough oxygen source through the catastrophic winds was introduced, and then it was able to reignite.
If found guilty, Rinderknecht faces up to 20 years in prison. The Palisades fire was one of 6 major fires that ravaged Southern California in January. The devastating blaze consumed more than 36 square miles, decimated thousands of homes, and left 12 people dead. And British investigators say the man who launched a terrorist attack against a synagogue on the holiest day on the Jewish calendar pledged allegiance to ISIS. The suspect rammed his car into people outside the synagogue in Manchester, England on Yom Kippur, and then jumped out of his car to start stabbing them. During the middle of the attack, he called emergency dispatchers to claim responsibility and to say he supported the Islamic State. He killed 1 person and injured 3 others before police arrived on the scene and shot him dead. Tragically, police also accidentally shot and killed a congregant who was in the line of fire. The attack has heightened concerns across Britain about anti-Semitic violence and prompted the government to increase police patrols around synagogues. We turn to important matters of free speech, gender identity, and Christianity at the Supreme Court next. The Supreme Court is back in session this week for its new term after justices spent an unusually busy summer recess going through an emergency docket full of President Trump's appeals. In this new season, the court will once again pay special attention to the limits of presidential power. Justices will examine Trump's sweeping tariffs in November. In December, they'll hear arguments for his firing of Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. Then in January, his firing of Federal Trade Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter. Since Trump's second term began, the High Court has weighed in on 24 cases on Trump's policies. Those orders from the court's emergency docket are temporary and do not concern the legality of an issue. These 3 upcoming cases will deliver final rulings on whether Trump's actions are protected by law. The High Court is hearing numerous other controversial issues, and its first high-profile case of the term, Childs versus Salazar. It considers whether a Christian counselor's work with children who struggle with gender discordance and same-sex attraction is protected under the First Amendment.
Issues of gender and sexuality come up regularly with my clients in our counseling conversations. And Colorado's law would hover over every conversation I have with my minor clients.
On Tuesday, the Supreme Court heard a case about what is commonly called conversion therapy for minors, or efforts by a licensed health professional to change or reduce same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria. At the center of the issue is a Colorado law that bans conversion therapy. Professionals who violate the law face thousands of dollars in fines and can even lose their license. The state argues the ban is, quote, based on overwhelming evidence that efforts to change a child's sexual orientation or gender identity are unsafe and ineffective.
And a state cannot be required to let its vulnerable young people waste their time and money on an ineffective, harmful treatment just because that treatment is delivered through words.
Kaylee Childs, a licensed Christian counselor who sued the state of Colorado, does not aim to change her clients' orientation or gender identity, but helps them feel comfortable with their biological sex through a faith-based lens. Her lawyers argue the state law constrains what she's allowed to say during her sessions, thereby violating her right to free speech.
Here, Colorado can't satisfy any level of heightened scrutiny. It didn't seriously consider any less restrictive alternatives, and Colorado can't prove harm because it hasn't cited a study focusing on what's at issue here, voluntary speech between a licensed professional and a minor.
The debate hinged on whether therapy should be treated as medical conduct or speech. A majority of the justices seemed poised to side with Childs.
So what if someone who happened to be devoutly religious and actually relied more on the minister than the therapist? it seemed that that person would be equally dangerous.
If a doctor says, I know you identify as gay, and I'm going to help you accept that, and another doctor says, I know you identify as gay, and I'm going to help you to change that, and one of those is permissible and the other is not, that seems like viewpoint discrimination.
The High Court will deliver its ruling before the term ends next summer. Its decision could impact more than 24 states, which have similar laws that limit conversion therapy.
We turn now to a leading Catholic voice on the gender ideology issue who previously worked as an attorney. Mary Rice Hasson is a senior fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, where she co-founded and directs the center's Person and Identity Project. Mary, thanks for being with us. To get us started, this case centers on the term conversion therapy, but what do you make of that framing?
Yeah, so that's a deceptive phrase because the phrase conversion therapy was used in the past to describe abusive behaviorist techniques that really aren't used anymore. The problem is Colorado's law uses this exact phrase to distinguish and outlaw speech that aims to help people live in accord with their faith. So it's aimed at voluntary conversations, talk therapy, requested by a client to help them deal with unwanted sexual attractions or to feel more comfortable in their bodies. So this case is not about abusive techniques. It's about talk therapy and free speech.
That's very important context. And Mary, the justices need to consider whether the plaintiff's counseling is considered speech or a medical treatment that includes speech. Why is this distinction so important?
Yeah, it's a distinction that is tremendously important because, as everyone knows, the Constitution protects free speech. And for the government to regulate speech, it has to really show a high burden that this is really, really necessary. But states have more latitude to regulate medical treatments, including speech that might be incidental to the medical treatment. Now, Colorado here argues that Christian talk therapy, therapy that's designed to help people live in accord with their faith, to help them understand their feelings, they're arguing that's actually a medical treatment and therefore the state can ban it. But Kaylee Childs, who is the Christian counselor who brought this case, says, no, this is about speech. And what's happening here is really that the Colorado law is engaging in viewpoint discrimination because it's trying to ban speech that helps people align their faith and their behaviors and their feelings, whereas it will permit speech that supports LGBTQ ideology.
Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson asked the counselor's attorney, Jim Campbell, about the so-called dangers of conversion therapy. Take a listen to their exchange.
I think there are like 25 states or something who have similar laws. So someone has some evidence related to the harmfulness of this activity, right?
Colorado certainly cites studies, but those studies suffer from significant flaws. The main flaw in all of them is that they lump together dissimilar approaches. They treat voluntary conversations the same as shock therapy.
Mary, can you give us more background on these studies they're talking about? Are they flawed?
Yes. So, in fact, the attorney for Counselor Childs was exactly right. The studies that the Colorado law tries to, and Justice Jackson was referring to, were really mostly older studies that looked at the question of whether what they called conversion therapy, which was primarily coercive techniques performed on adults related to same-sex attraction, whether that caused harm. And actually, the evidence in those studies was very ambiguous. It was not clear. But that's not what's at stake here. And that's the point that the attorney was making, that what we're talking about here is talk therapy, and it pertains to children, particularly children who are feeling not comfortable in their own bodies. There is no evidence, there are no studies that show that helping a child feel more comfortable with their body is somehow causing harm. So that's a misdirection. It's an attempt to lump together old studies that didn't apply and say, well, that's reason enough for the state to be able to ban speech that the state disagrees with.
And can you expand on that exact point? Can you speak about the importance of talk therapy specifically in helping children find peace with their biological body?
Sure. One thing we do know is that there are a lot of different reasons why a child could feel uncomfortable with their body or hate different body parts or feel uncertain about who they are. And so it's tremendously important for a counselor to be able to establish a really good relationship with the person and say, well, let's talk, let's understand who you are, let's explore these feelings when they came up, let's really dig deep. And yet this statute, this Colorado statute, is saying you can't have those conversations. The only thing you can do is to facilitate or assist someone in moving towards gender transition. So it's really viewpoint discrimination in terms of what these conversations are about. And that's why this case is so important, to uphold the rights of free speech and to give families and clients the ability to find a counselor who's going to work with them in accord with their own goals.
Yeah. You've already mentioned, and we talked about how conversion therapy is really being misconstrued here, but just to put a fine point on it, so-called conversion therapy is often tied to the Christian faith. But does the Catholic Church specifically have a stance on this practice? What is the Church's pastoral approach to those who struggle with same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria?
Yeah, the Church doesn't take a position on whether or not someone's going to be able to reorient their feelings. But what the Church does say is we're against coercion, against abusive behavior or conditioning techniques, but we do support techniques or conversations or talk therapy that's designed to help someone live in accord with their faith and with their beliefs. And oftentimes that involves understanding your past history, what led you to experience certain things, and then to really support the person in living in accord with integrity, in accord with their faith. And so that's the distinction. The Church is not in favor of coercive, abusive techniques. It is in favor of helping people live their faith with integrity and to have those conversations and help people find the support that allows them to do that.
Mary Rice Hasson, I am so grateful for your expertise and for joining us for this important story. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Some of our friends on the street say they come for the coffee, but they want to stay because they feel loved.
When we come back, what a difference a simple act of kindness can mean for people living on the street. We introduce you to an apostolate in America's heartland that doles out a little bit of humanity with every cup of joe.
Economic hardship, personal struggles, and lack of adequate support systems are all too real for people who are unhoused and living on the streets across America. In our nation's heartland, EWTN News in Depth found one ministry for those experiencing homelessness that's making a big difference, one smile and cup of coffee at a time. Reporter Alan Holdren is in Omaha, Nebraska to tell us about a program called Hope of the Poor in this Catholic Life report.
In the rapidly developing downtown of Omaha, Nebraska, just next to the Jesuit-run Creighton University, there are dozens of men and women who live on the streets around the former Holy Family Catholic Church. It's no longer an active parish, but in 2020, the Archdiocese converted it into a center to assist the homeless.
They all kind of come here for sack lunches, for clothes, for coffee.
Opening the doors to the poor, Danny Ledger and Craig Joring started a Hope of the Poor location here in 2021.
We are a nonprofit ministry. We're trying to evangelize by connecting the people with the poor and the poor with people.
Their job is to learn to make friends and to just be the hands and feet of Christ to these people who really, they're coming here not just for coffee, because they want this experience. They come here because they need love and they want to feel that acceptance.
Our contribution is to hopefully help the church understand that the poor are a gift and they're not just a problem, and to bring a model of development to the poor so the people that want to change can change.
They're Jesus in this distressing disguise, but I want to run to that encounter, to be close to Jesus. But when people see the joy of that encounter, I think they want a part of it.
Shorty, how you doing? I'm good.
Joring, a longtime missionary, is just visiting today. He spends much of the year leading Hope of the Poor missions in Mexico City. Ledger, a musician and experienced youth minister, runs the day-to-day operations here in Omaha. Through day missions, he and 2 full-time Hope of the Poor missionaries introduce volunteers into the ministry.
But just introduce yourself and ask people what their names are to start. That's really easy, right?
What's your name? Regina? Hi, I'm Heather.
Here in Omaha, Hope of the Poor staff and volunteers provide hot drinks and company to all those who come on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays every week of the year. This particular day, a youth group from Bellwood, Nebraska, led by their pastor, Father Steve Gravy, is volunteering, witnessing Christ to the poor and witnessing Christ in the poor.
Jesus said you'll always have the poor with you, so you're not going to solve it, but you can love them, and he did command us to, to love them. So it's beautiful to be able to actually practice that in a concrete, tangible way.
Father Gravy took a parish group on mission with Hope of the Poor to Mexico City in February and wanted to introduce his youth group to Omaha's so-called coffee garage as well. It's the first time many of these students from small Nebraska towns are serving the poor so closely, following Hope of the Poor's motto, alleviating the poverty of being unloved.
Jesus always says you gotta go out and serve the poor, and you don't ever really know what that's like. It hurts almost. I didn't realize what it would be like. I just think, oh well, whatever, it's fine, we'll just go see what they are. But it really makes you want to help them.
It was a good time, good learning experience to see how other people live and how their lives are compared to ours, and it's just a good thing to see.
Full-time missionary Bella Worthing says volunteers expand the Hope of the Poor mission exponentially, reaching more people than they could ever reach themselves.
I watched a lot of the people we had here today just going around and being so invigorated and so entwined in their conversations with the people they were in, and the homeless don't ever get something like that. Just to have somebody's undivided attention, means the world to them.
Putting into practice the corporal and spiritual works of mercy, these students and missionaries, and those they're serving, are coming ever closer to Christ. And their hope is that others will follow in their footsteps.
You ain't really got nothing to do, come check it out. You might be surprised that you really like it and the people that's involved in it.
In Omaha, Nebraska, Alan Holdren, EWTN News in Depth.
In addition to the Hope of the Poor locations in Omaha and Mexico City, the ministry is just getting another site off the ground in Kansas City. And finally today, with a heavy heart but with gratitude for a life well lived, we mourn the death of Sister Jean, the beloved chaplain for Loyola Chicago's men's basketball team. The university announced her passing at the age of 106 on Thursday night. Sister Jean Dolores Smith of the Sisters of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary became an international celebrity during Loyola Chicago's fairy tale run to the NCAA Final Four tournament in 2018. As the team chaplain for more than 30 years, her players said she provided an invaluable mix of spiritual and scouting support. On her 105th birthday last year, she told her many fans that the secret to living a long life was, quote, loving others and God, taking care of your mind and body, and interacting with young people. May Sister Jean's life, wisdom, faith, and grace be an example to us all. Eternal rest grant unto her, O Lord, and may perpetual light shine upon her. I'm Catherine Hadro. Until we see you again, God bless.